podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, one of the world's leading international professional bodies which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Rob Lawrence, and in this new series, I'm delighted to introduce you to a small number of coaches who specifically focus on coaching men. We are aware that many men are struggling with their lives, their sense of meaning and purpose, their relationships, finances, physical and mental health and well-being. You'll hear from some of those who share their own life-changing stories, why coaching men matters, the various approaches they use, and the impact they are having. Hello and welcome back to this 6th episode in the series on coaching men. My guest today is Cassandra Andrews, a UK-based coach who specialises in supporting high-achieving men in both the UK and North America. She works with FTSE 100 CEOs, elite athletes, as well as clients who are founders of multi-million-pound businesses. Trained in motivational maps and as a practitioner in NLP timeline therapy, she is also the author of the Amazon #1 best-selling book, Unlearning Masculinity, which will be at the heart of our conversation today. So Cassandra, a very warm welcome to the podcast.
Wonderful to be here, Rob.
It's great to have you on the show today. So you've got a book which has been out for about a year or so now, and the audiobook is coming, which is super exciting. And it's called Unlearning Masculinity. So I'm curious as to the nature of the name of the title of your book, Unlearning Masculinity. What do you mean by that?
It invokes quite a lot of conversation, actually. The important part, actually, of the title is the subtitle, which is Redefining Success for High-Achieving Men Over 40, because I believe that men have been brought up with a blueprint to be strong and stoic and to be a real man, not to be vulnerable. Certainly men of my generation in their 40s and 50s onwards. So actually, by unlearning masculinity, what I mean by that is relearning what it is to be a man.
And what is it you feel that more specifically needs to be relearned? What is it that men have grown up with that needs redefining or needs their relationship to that thing changing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's around vulnerability, whatever that might mean to anybody really. But to me, vulnerability is about saying what you're thinking and feeling and being able to find a space where that can be held, which is why I think coaching is so important for men.
I guess it's one of those things that often doesn't get challenged. I can imagine many men can go through their whole lives and not ever examine that aspect about themselves, that they've always been trying to solve the challenges and the problems and the issues that they face in life in a particular way. And from what I've learned from reading your book is that often men are trying to solve those problems in their head and without help. Mm-hmm. So it's fascinating to me to think that a man can go through their whole life without any intervention there that could potentially address and support them with the challenges that they face unattended. So my curiosity is in terms of the types of people that you work with and those that you find yourself working with, is that the case? And also we can ask a bit more around why men find it hard to ask for help. What do you feel is in their way? Well,
it's the blueprint that's in the way, without doubt. So in terms of men asking for help, I think it absolutely goes back to being brought up that you don't show vulnerability because that's weakness, and weakness means that you're not safe, ultimately, as a man. So that's really challenging, isn't it? And I believe men have been taught to win. And if you're asking for help, then you're not winning, are you?
Yeah. And that taught to win is a fascinating concept for me. Do you find that that is a common thread, a common theme with those that you work with? There's this idea of what a man should be and what they need to have in order to be successful.
Yeah, without doubt. And even in the coaching space, some people will come to me and want to win at coaching, which it just makes me laugh, or they need to win at their divorce, or win at being friends after the divorce or whatever it might be. It's always about winning. Although I guess one might want to reframe winning as maybe growing, potentially. But yes, I do notice it. And because I'm all for winning, but where's it coming from? What's the purpose of winning for you in this scenario would always be my question.
And I'd love to explore that a little bit more with you, because that's fascinating to me. Because to your point there, on the one hand, it's one thing to have goals, and then there's another thing to be actually winning, which to me sounds more competitive. Do you feel that a lot of men are competitive in that way? They feel they have to win something or win something over in order to feel successful?
Yeah, well, I wonder, I'm just curious actually thinking about some of my clients. I wonder if men have been taught any other way, because perhaps they haven't. So once again, maybe they're just following the blueprint about what winning means. It's an interesting question.
Absolutely. I can certainly think that from a cultural point of view, it almost feels like, certainly from a Western cultural point of view, that there's a lot of emphasis on peak performance. There's a lot of emphasis on winning this and the various different trophies of things that you could win to be seen as a successful person. And I imagine that a lot of the work that you do is about redefining success.
So most of the men that come to me as clients are experiencing one of three problems ultimately. And the clients that I work with are high achieving. So we're thinking about CEOs, C-suite, entrepreneurs, founders, elite sportsmen. And they tend to have one of these three problems. So the first is issues around identity. So they are their role in the business, in society, in the family, whatever it might be. And the question then becomes, well, what happens if that's taken away? So they sell their business. Who are they without their business that's probably become their baby? Or they get divorced and leave the family home and then they're not the family man again. Like, who are they? So lots of questions around identity. The second is around purpose. And if we just take somebody that's maybe a founder of a business for the last 35 years, has created this incredible business and sold it and exited, and then they've got a stack of cash, bought the car, done the things that people imagine that they would do with the money, maybe then dabbled in some businesses, yet they still find there's this hole. And none of these things externally fill the hole. So then they start asking, well, it doesn't feel like I thought it would feel. And the third is a issue around feeling trapped. And that might be in a business in terms of responsibility for employees, or it might be in a relationship or a marriage where the man's unhappy but doesn't really know how to move out of it. So most of my clients come to me with one or more of those key core issues. And ultimately, all they want, the prize, as I would describe it, is emotional freedom. And freedom and autonomy and choice is this driving force, particularly, I think, at this time of life. And it's how to get that. And so the work that I do with my clients is through the unconscious mind in terms of reprogramming, so we can get to a point where they feel freedom. And so often men come to me saying that they feel stuck would be one of the words that they would use, or they want to get off the hamster wheel, or they've got this hole that needs filling. And it's working out actually what they want their life to look like. And I remember one client left a role, a senior CEO role, and didn't know what he wanted to do and ended up moving abroad and taking his whole family abroad, which, is amazing. And somebody else was dabbling in businesses and none of them were fulfilling, and realized actually, I don't want any of this, and was able to be very articulate in terms of what they wanted their life to look like. I've had other people in terms of relationships. It kind of goes both ways. Some people leave relationships, some people suddenly do the work, and then their relationship is incredible and really impacts their partner as well. And I think that's another thing that's really important about coaching and the work that we do, is thinking about the other person. If somebody's in a relationship, because I do think that impacts sometimes whether men want to be coached, as well as the outcome of what's happened.
That's fascinating. So I'm really curious to explore that more, that journey that you're describing there, or the journeys, because I suppose there's sort of various journeys there that you're describing. Just coming back a step, before they find you or before they ask for your support, do you find when you get to know them that actually they've been struggling without asking for help for a while?
Yes.
And what do you feel it is that prevents them from asking for help before they've found whatever it is that they need to find to be able to ask for your help, Cassandra?
One of the things that I do is I run these intimate dinners. So 9 men and me and we have a 3-course meal, and I market it as everything you've always wanted to say but never felt you could. So it's totally Chatham House rules, and sometimes some of the men know each other, sometimes they don't. What was very apparent from the very first dinner that I held was that some men really want to talk, but they're scared of unpacking the box because they might not be able to put the lid back on it, which I know some of the other coaches that coach men have mentioned in previous podcasts, but it is also my experience. And it was actually that made me think, okay, well, perhaps they need a DIY version. I need to write the book so that they can help themselves, or at least realize that actually it's not necessarily going to cause discomfort. And I think that's the thing, that there is an assumption that if you unpack, it's going to be really uncomfortable and take you to places that you don't want to go, and you're not going to be able to close the filing cabinet. And that's not what happens, because I believe your unconscious mind is only going to give you what it can deal with. That doesn't say that there might not be discomfort, because there could be. However, I'd like to caveat that with whatever you resist persists. It's up to you. You have the agency. It's your life, right? And that's what's really important to me in my coaching and with the book. Let's have some self-awareness. If you want to do something about it, then that's incredible. If you don't, that's also okay. It's your life.
Yeah, that self-awareness piece is fascinating to me. At what point does somebody become self-aware enough for them to appreciate that they might need some support with whatever it is that they're going through? And I'm really inspired by your invitation there as quite a unique one, this dinner and that environment. As I can imagine, certainly some of the more high-flying professionals that you work with, that could actually be quite an enticing opportunity and something that they feel compelled to do. And that could be a way in for them, perhaps, to the sorts of services and support that you offer. So that's quite an interesting piece alone that I wanted to explore there. Just for our listeners' benefit, you mentioned Chatham House rules. In the context of your coaching and working, it almost sounds like to me a group coaching scenario there. How does that work? If someone listening to this thought, oh, okay, that might be something I'd like to try or do, what could they expect in terms of how those dinners are held and what the space feels like?
I think you almost don't need to say it's Chatham House, because everybody is going with the expectation that they're going to have a transparent conversation with other men that are also going to be open and transparent. And I truly believe, which is part of the reason of kind of setting up the dinner, that men want to talk. All they need is the space and permission to talk, and they will. I truly believe that from my experience of working with men. So let's just create some environments. And also, I pre-frame the dinner in terms of what will happen. I get them to fill out a bit of a scorecard so I know where they are. So all of that is kind of setting up, I think, this space of confidentiality. And every dinner that I've held, you can just see the incredible relationships that are developing, and men just want more of it. And they're working out, well, how can we have more of this either together or in different groups? It's funny, isn't it? I think men need a reason to get together, whereas women will just like go and have a coffee. Men need an activity to be able to talk. That is my experience. And certainly from talking to many men, that seems to be the case. I don't know what you think, Rob.
Yeah, I would somewhat agree with that. And there's a couple of things that's sort of standing out to me at the moment. One is actually in this series so far, it's been really interesting to me about how coaches like yourself have been putting themselves out there and providing opportunities for men to be able to open up. So whether that's in a group setting, a dinner setting, as you're suggesting, sometimes it's an outdoor setting, sometimes it can be a walk. And I think that what's inspiring me is that there are more and more opportunities for men to get together, but somebody has to instigate that. And so I'm further inspired by the fact that coaches are taking the lead and saying, well, I'm going to set this thing up and create the invitation for men to then be with other men and have that conversation, or begin to have those conversations, but perhaps with a little bit more purpose than maybe just catching up with their regular mates and going to a football match, for example. this has got a bit more intention about moving forward and perhaps facing head on some of the challenges that they might be facing. And what's interesting about your work, and similarly with some of the other guests that I've had on this series, is there's an intention to work with people in their midlife. And it seems to me that I've heard about the smile curve and the dip in the middle, so to speak. And that seems to be where a lot of the focus is. And some of the statistics even back this up, that is where it is most challenging for men in their 40s and their 50s. And being able to think through those problems isn't enough, as your book suggests. So I somewhat agree with what you're saying. I think there's definitely a benefit to not just going alone in terms of facing these problems. And I'm also inspired that actually how much group work is going on here. This isn't just about seeing a coach one-to-one. This is about getting together with other men as well and actually talking about the similarities and the differences and the challenges that they face.
Yeah, and that they're not alone, which I think is a key thing that I'm asked to talk about quite a lot because of the men that I work with who are often CEOs, founders, and who do they talk to. I think that's really important. In fact, one of the things I'm in the process of setting up is a group retreat, which again is another opportunity for men to kind of come together and share their experiences, which, is just so important because otherwise, where do they?
Just on that, I'm curious with the work that you do, how much of it is reflective and how much of it is sort of looking at where they are now and moving forward? What would you say the balance of that is?
When somebody comes to me, we always work out what does an extraordinary life look like for them and what's getting in the way of that extraordinary life. And those things that need to be maybe cleared out, reframed, reprogrammed, whatever terminology you want to use, is the work that I would do first. So yes, reflective. However, because I'm working with the unconscious mind, actually, we don't need to do lots of traditional talking. We can just get straight to the reprogramming, which particularly high achieving men, the types of men that I work with, they're up for let's move forward. However, because most of the men that I work with don't have another outlet in terms of sharing what they're thinking and feeling, they do talk a lot. They do have a lot of kind of catharsis, which feels important to create that space for them. And I always think, when a woman tells a coach something, in my experience and thinking about myself, when a woman tells a coach something, and she's the I've never told anyone this before, she means apart from her mother, her sister, her best friend. When a man says it, those words have never left his lips, which is why it's such a privilege to be able to hold that space for a man. It is a true privilege.
Yeah, how interesting. Yeah. And something you mentioned there, you talked about working with the unconscious mind. And I know in your book, you talk about NLP, which for the coaches listening to this, that perhaps is familiar territory. But I'm curious, without going into too much detail, but to offer our listener a sense of what you're talking about there, what sort of work do you find yourself doing with the various men when they open up to you in that way?
We always start with a specific field of NLP called timeline therapy, which basically is about removing any unwanted scar tissue, let's use that word, around some of the big emotions. So anger, sadness, fear, hurt, guilt, some of these really big emotions. And the way that I would describe it is, you can live with all of those emotions and all of that kind of heaviness and scar tissue of stuff that's built up over the years. Let's say it's like a bag of rocks, in a rucksack. You can carry it around, but actually what would happen if you were able to take the rucksack off? And actually then you would be so much lighter. And what timeline therapy does is it helps you take the rucksack off. So of course you're going to feel those feelings, but you're not going to have 4 or 5 decades of stuff that you bring to situations now. When, I don't know, somebody cuts you up on the A11 or whatever it might be, you haven't got all of that baggage. And so life just feels so much lighter. It's incredible.
Yes, I'm sure it's powerful. I'm sure it's not always that simple for everyone just to simply unload and then be able to move forward.
You'd be surprised. Genuinely.
Okay. So I'm curious to learn more about that in terms of how timeline therapy is applied in the context of working with men in this particular context.
I use it in a couple of ways. So firstly, to help, once we've worked out what they want, we have this clean out of emotions. And then we also use it to understand somebody's beliefs, and actually those beliefs that aren't working for them, which many coaches would call kind of limiting beliefs. So those beliefs that aren't working for them, we then reprogram, basically, using timeline therapy. And it's a really quick process. And that's what's so wonderful. I was doing it with a client yesterday and we were looking at guilt. And he already checked in with me today to say, oh my goodness, I just feel so light. Everything just feels so freeing. And freeing actually is a word that people use a lot after having timeline therapy. And I've had a lot myself, which is why I'm such a huge advocate of the benefits of it.
For those that are curious, what are the mechanics of timeline therapy? What does that involve? Does that involve moving forward into the future, going back into the past? What does that look like?
So it involves going back into the past to an event that you take positive learnings from. So the question that I would normally get asked is, well, what if I can't remember the first event and I don't know where I'm going? That is the whole process of timeline therapy and NLP really. And it's just trusting the process that your unconscious mind will give you whatever it needs to give you. And sometimes it might not be in your lifetime. And again, for many of my clients that are very logical, very in their head, for me to say, well, it might not be in your lifetime, I get the, are you serious, Cassandra? Which is when I would then normally talk about epigenetics and how trauma can be passed through generations, etc. And usually men, they seem to get it and to understand, because I appreciate that it could be for some people an unusual concept.
Yeah.
But if they trust me and trust the process, then, let's play with it. And that's what I would say. Well, let's just have a play. Like nothing's going to go wrong. It's a beautiful thing.
There's a whole other podcast in that just alone, but that's revealing and interesting in the sense that actually you're playing again towards the sort of logical thinking side of the brain there and addressing that with some of the structure that you're offering, and that itself providing a container within which I imagine you can explore some of the emotional side of the work that you do with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we always start with the emotions because that's like the reset point, I think. And it might be as we go through the process and they've let go and release stuff that actually there's other stuff that comes up that then reveals itself. And it is this beautiful journey of life that will reveal to us when it's ready, which I appreciate for people, particularly my clients that want to move fast and want to kind of get to the end. Well, there isn't really an end, is there? It's ever evolving. And that is what coaching and life is about. And it sounds a bit cheesy, but it is about the journey and just being in the moment of that.
That's an interesting image that I've got in my mind now. One of the things that struck me about your book is particularly towards the end where you talk about vision. And just before we started recording today off air, you mentioned that's actually the place where you begin with a lot of your clients. So I'd love to get into some of that. And in the context of the journey there, one of the things that often comes up for me when I work with people on their vision is that it is like a horizon where you're always traveling towards it, but you never actually get there. And the image that you see on the horizon is always changing. So I can very much relate with what you were just sharing with us there and this concept of vision. But let's get into that a little bit, because I don't feel we've really covered that too much in this series. And I certainly believe in the importance of vision, but I'd love to hear it from your point of view and the work that you do and how you work with men in terms of redefining their vision, because I can imagine, and certainly from some of my own experience, you come to midlife and, in certain areas of your life, you feel like you've achieved everything you ever wanted and you're kind of left with this now what sort of situation. And then there's other things that you haven't fulfilled and you may never fulfill. And then there's having to redefine that as well. So tell me more about the work you do with vision.
I think that vision is one of the most important things, which is why I start with it, because we need to know where we're going ultimately. And this seems to be a really clear concept for most of my clients because they're used to strategies, goals, targets, etc. in their kind of other world. But we're not calling it a goal. We are calling it a vision, which is different, right? Because I believe a goal is much more about hitting something, like getting there, whereas actually we're just creating a direction of travel, perhaps, would be a good way to describe it. But we have to tell our brain what we want. So that's why I always start with the vision. And usually clients really struggle to write their vision which is wonderful. And there is so much value in that because that's where the work is. And that's the things that need to happen and the emotions that need to be let go of and the beliefs that need to fall away. And so often the vision is around, well, my favorite word, should, which certainly as coaches, we know that this word should is a dangerous word. So often I will say to clients, if there's anything in your vision that is about should, whether that's expectations of society, your parents, your wife, kids, whoever, and it's not something that feels energetic and that is pulling you forward, then let's just take it out. And that can feel quite threatening, actually, because again, going back to identity, well, that's what I thought I wanted. So I get my clients to write a vision and I get them to write it in a very sensory NLP way. So we are writing it in terms of what life would look, sound and feel like this time next year when we're there. So we're in the vision, seeing it through our own eyes and making it very sensory. So one of the things I get my clients to do right at the start of coaching with me so that I can talk their language is to look at their representational system, so their rep system, so are they visual, auditory, etc. And we make sure that their vision talks to their rep system because that is clearly how they take information in. So if they're very visual this time next year in their vision, what are they seeing around them? And to really describe, in multicolour what they're seeing so that it connects to their brain. I talk a lot about the reticular activating system, so the RAS, which I'm sure you know a lot about, but for any of your listeners that don't know about the RAS, this is the part of your brain that is finding what you tell it. So this is a reason why we need to program our RAS that takes everything as reality with what we want for life. So it can work for us and find the things that we want, or it can work against us. So if we're saying, I know I'm no good at maths, I'm not sure why that came up, I'm no good at maths, it will find all of the reasons that you're no good at maths. So, it's really important, which is why language is so important, this language that we're saying to each other. So in terms of the vision, really sensory, we're in it, we're seeing it through our own eyes, it's like a movie in our head, then we're telling our RAS what we want.
Yeah, so that's about finding supporting evidence then towards that new vision. You mentioned language there. I thought that was really interesting. And I was curious as to how your clients' language may change when they arrive beginning to work with you and what it looks like or sounds like, I suppose, when they move on from your services and they've achieved what it is that they've come to you for. You mentioned earlier that freedom was something that was a big aspect to their journey. I was also curious, you mentioned about them feeling stuck when they arrive at your doorstep. What else are they saying that changes as they go on that journey with you, Cassandra?
Some of the phrases stuck. Some of the things that I said earlier around I know I should be grateful, but there's this hole. I want to get off the hamster wheel. So all things that are linked to these three problems of identity, purpose, and feeling trapped. They are the common themes that come up.
And what sort of things are they saying when they've developed a new vision for themselves, perhaps?
So often they will laugh at themselves because they'll hear themselves saying things like, should. I have one client who would consistently say, well, I don't know. So I would always say, well, what if you did know? What if you were guessing? What if you did know? And in his last session, he bought me a t-shirt that said, what if I did know? It's just about picking up your language and the stories that you're telling yourselves all of the time. That's so important because that is impacting the results and the outcome that you're getting.
In your book, you talk about internal and external motivation, and that was something that just came to mind there as you were speaking. And I'm curious as to what it is that you identify about their motivations when they arrive to work with you. And I'm curious further to learn whether you feel that their motivations change over time and when you work together, whether their motivations change as well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I use a tool called Motivational Maps, which basically helps people understand what their core motivators are. And when I say motivators, really all I'm talking about is somebody's values ultimately, and how kind of fulfilled and nourished they are. So they can see with sort of hard data, which always is very helpful to my clients that like facts and figures usually. And it also shows where they might have some internal conflict, which is so often when they start coming to me. I've lost count of the number of clients that have got 1, 2, 3, 4 sports cars. And they're like, I just don't know if I want them anymore. I haven't driven them. Like, I drive one car. What's the point of having 4, or whatever? And it's so often when we look at their motivational map, because their drivers have now changed from being about above average standard of living and stuff and all of the external stuff to freedom, meaning and purpose. And sometimes they feel really uncomfortable that they don't actually want somebody to see them driving the Porsche, whatever it might be, because actually their motivation around meaning and purpose is so much more important. And I do see with men anyway, anybody really, humans, that as we move into kind of later life, the things that become more important to us tends to be freedom, meaning and purpose, perhaps being creative, giving back, all of these things, as opposed to stuff. Now, that might be because we've already got the stuff, maybe, but it's this really core drive, particularly freedom, really quite extreme for many people.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Coming back to what you were sharing with us earlier in terms of what men are going through and what it is that they're feeling when they come to you, and this sense of feeling trapped, as you described earlier, or having this identity crisis, and redefining that is what I was hearing there in terms of language, but also relationship to things and possessions and motivation. From the little I know about motivational maps, our motivational map can change over time. So you could do it in your 20s, and what motivates you then could be quite different to what motivates you in your 40s.
Yeah, absolutely. And could change every couple of years, potentially. If we've got big life events happening to us, then it's very likely that things might start moving around. I have some clients that will do them quite frequently, because actually the piece that's really interesting is the piece around how fulfilled are your motivators, which will change. Maybe not the things that are important to you, but actually how nourished they are, which it's just fascinating to have a language to describe how you're feeling. And that's the reason that I love the map. And I train coaches and consultants in the tool because I just love it so much. And I think for a man to see, oh, this is what's driving me and this is what it means, a really good example would be part of me wants control, part of me wants freedom. So those two motivators potentially are bashing heads, which is why he can't sell the business, because he still wants to be involved in the business, but he also wants to be free and he wants to exit. But there's something, and actually when you can see it in black and white, it just gives you a different lens to understand what's going on. It's really very powerful.
And in those types of scenarios, what do you see as the sort of common solution? I'm sure it's unique to each individual, but what changes? Is it their relationship to those things? Is it the language that they use when they describe the relationship to those things? Or do they actually change those things? Do they come away with sort of hard goals to say, I am going to leave the business, or I am going to change my life?
The starting point is absolutely understanding the purpose behind freedom, purpose behind being in control. So that would automatically lead to some sort of values elicitation. So to understand what's going on for them and to look at overarching life values, which I know you've kind of talked a little bit about values on some of the other podcasts. And values is always something that I do with clients, because actually there might be some values that are towards and some that might be away from values. And so it's understanding that actually is probably the problem between these butting motivators. And it might be also there's some different parts of you that need integrating and coming together, which again is something that I would do with a client, which basically is understanding the purpose of both of those parts, because, our unconscious mind is trying to keep us safe and always has a good intention. It's just that might have been when we were 5, not necessarily helpful when we're 55.
So it's a case of letting go in many respects.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
That's really fascinating. And it's really interesting to hear how you're using tools like motivational maps as part of this process and this journey that you're describing there as well. So we're coming to the close in our conversation today. I just realised how quickly the time is flying. In terms of the shifts and changes that you see in those that you work with, what would you say the common themes are amongst all of them?
Perhaps it's about judgment. I think they don't judge themselves in the way that they used to. And this ruminating, chatty, irritating voice that likes to narrate your life actually is quietened. I just think that compassion for ourselves is so important. And if we can have compassion and understand and let go of some stuff, then we're going to be less judgy of ourselves and others. It's peace. I guess it's peace.
Yeah.
If I'm selling something, I think I'm selling peace.
Yeah. No, I can understand that. And I remember a point in my own journey where actually what I was striving for was peace and not necessarily happiness.
Yes.
I found that you can experience happiness from time to time, but actually it's peace that I was really looking for. So I can relate to some of what you're saying there. And that's really interesting what you were saying there about the judgment and the compassion. I want to be careful about saying this, but I do wonder sometimes whether men are more judgmental on themselves or about themselves than women can be. In a similar but different way with compassion, I probably know more women that are a bit more compassionate with themselves than men. But I'm also aware of my own biases and also what you were saying there about the RAS. And actually, that might be a belief I need to analyse and have a look.
I think we can all be very judgy of ourselves, whether we're men or women, in my experience, just in a different way.
I think you're probably closer to the truth there. It's the nature of that judgment. It's the nature of that compassion that can vary, as you quite rightly state. I'm sure we all experience that, but in different ways. And it's really interesting to hear how that's one of the fundamental things that shifts in the experience of others that you work with. So that's really good. One of the questions I've been asking throughout the series is what you feel needs to change in the world. So something that's emerging for me as we're putting the series together is awareness, actually. I realised that the importance of these conversations I hadn't appreciated, but by having them, by putting them out there into the world, it's actually creating awareness. And to something you mentioned earlier, it's just to get people talking and not alone. So that's one of the things that's come up for me. But I'm curious for you, Cassandra, what would you like to see change in the world to support men more?
I think you're absolutely right in terms of talking about it. And I've actually been really surprised and pleased that there does seem to be a shift, I think, in the last year around men's mental health specifically, actually, for whatever reasons. And this is clearly a good thing. In terms of the shift, I just think it's not that we're men or we're women, but that we're human. And to be curious. You know, and I say this in my book, that a light has been shone on women for a long time. And that's a really important thing that needed to have happened. Yet in that, the light has then been taken away from men. And so many men are struggling. So what if we were just all human and we were all just curious and compassionate for each other? What might that do?
Yeah, I think that's a lovely reflection to give further thought to towards the end of our conversation here today. So I really appreciate that. Is there anything you feel we haven't touched upon today that you feel would be important to say?
The only thing is, I think self-awareness is really important. And we were talking a little bit about this before we came on air. And for me, get some self-awareness, read the books. Then it's up to you if you want to do anything with it. You don't have to. You have agency over your own life. If you want to live an extraordinary life that feels totally free and internally peaceful, then probably going to want to turn inwards. But you don't have to. And you can live a great life also. And I think what I want really is for people not to think that, they're being preached at, but actually they have agency, knowing for so many of my clients, their number one motivator is about freedom and autonomy. And actually they want to have choice. And that's okay because it's your life at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's interesting what you were saying there about choice when we were talking earlier about control and freedom in that capacity as well. I'm very grateful for your time today, Cassandra. I really enjoyed reading your book.
Thank you.
Thank you for sending me a copy of that.
You're welcome.
For anyone listening to this, I urge you to get a copy, have a read of it. I felt, and I mentioned this to you off air earlier, Cassandra, I felt it's a really good and interesting, I don't want to say compilation, but bringing together of various different coaching models in quite a unique way. I felt that I can't help but feel that a lot of men out there who may never even heard of coaching, which I'm sure there are many that have never even heard of the world of coaching or coaching in any shape or form, And I feel your book is a really good access point to that world for those men that are interested in changing their lives for the better. So well done on putting that together. I don't underestimate what's involved in writing and pulling a book like that together. And you've got the audiobook coming along very soon.
Yes, in the next couple of weeks.
Amazing. And it's also been nominated for the British Business Book Awards. Is that right?
Yes, I'm a finalist. So we find out in September.
Yeah, so that's super exciting as well.
It is very, yes.
Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. My final question is for our listener who might want to connect with you, Cassandra, to learn more. Where can they reach you?
Best place is my website, CassandraAndrews.com, and you will find links to everything else there. And also there's a host of free resources if people want to explore any of the things that we've spoken about today. So CassandraAndrews.com. That's brilliant. So that's CassandraAndrews.com, CASSANDRA, Andrews, ANDREWS.com. So they can come and find you there. Thanks ever so much again for being part of this series, Cassandra. Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, interviews, podcasts, and a portfolio of live events for your continuing professional development.